Super Earth is a corporatocracy. So, we've made it this far down without really discussing the true origins of Super Earth. On the surface, it might look somewhat like a dictatorship, which is not entirely wrong. Please don't report me to the Ministry of Truth. But, what if we dig a little deeper? Who is actually controlling Super Earth? We know the managed democracy has been put in place in order to direct the governance of Super Earth, with the help of an AI, of course, but who's controlling that AI? Who does this managed democracy operate at the behest of? Remember momentarily that the bugs are being farmed for element 710, which is essentially oil. If you flip 710 upside down, it looks like the word oil. Very tongue-in-cheek. But that wasn't the reason for attacking Terminid planets in the first galactic war. Instead, Super Earth was looking for mineral deposits and incidentally discovered that the Terminids degrade into space fuel. In other words, the origins of Super Earth's expansion was not a moral offensive against the bugs, but rather an expedition in resource mining. Only once the Terminids were almost eradicated, and it was discovered that their fuel could be used to fuel Super Earth space travel, did we begin to farm them. Now, let's connect the dots. A paramilitary group focused on the collection of resources, not just on Terminid planets, as we've seen, but from other planets like Cyberstan. Then, a source of ultra-valuable space fuel is discovered, and the efforts shift to farming and collecting it at all costs. It's starting to sound, to me, like a functioning corporation rather than a government. If you don't believe me, let's take a closer look at the public service announcement from Super Earth. Zoom in on the small print, and what do you find? Quote, brought to you by Super Earth Proprietary Limited, sponsored by Super Earth. If you ask me, that doesn't sound like a governmental public service announcement, but rather an announcement made by a company. I believe that during the Great War, the war that took place before all the galactic space travel and such, several large companies, likely energy, oil, and gas type companies, sensed weakness in the governments of the Earth and set up a movement to overthrow them. And everything since that moment has been at the behest of one mega corporation directing all warfare throughout the galaxy. All resources gathered during space travel and war go directly toward further expansion and war efforts, and further control of the galaxy, no matter the cost. Helldivers are cannon fodder that can be thrown away and thrown into the front lines, and are used not because they're especially effective, but because they are incredibly dispensable and cheap to replace. Speaking of fuel and resource collection at all costs, let's move on. The origins of the Terminids. None of us like bugs, let's be honest. And if I saw a bus-sized bug running toward me, you better bet I'd be in the same boat as the Helldivers. But what if I told you that the bugs were not always violent? That before the actions of Super Earth, the Terminids existed peacefully on their home planet and posed no threat to Super Earth, let alone the galaxy. As we've covered, in the First Galactic War, the purpose was not initially to farm the Terminids for fuel. It was to mine other resources on their planets. A fact made all the more interesting when the Helldivers Encyclopedia says the following about Terminids. Quote, Terminids were, or possibly still are, sapient beings with their own language and culture. They were said to be the first alien race to make peaceful contact with humanity. This is heavily disputed by historians. However, either before or during the First Galactic War, Super Earth discovered that dead Terminid bodies decayed into an oil-like substance, which they named Element 710, the pursuit of which all but ensured that peace would never be an option. End quote. But here's where things take a turn. You see, we know that Super Earth developed their faster-than-light travel technology, at least in part through adapting technology from the Illuminate, meaning that our faster-than-light technology probably functions in a very similar way. And if that's the case, it's very possible that the Illuminate use the same fuel for their own travel, a fuel that's produced in plentiful amounts by decaying Terminids. This might imply that Super Earth was not the first faction to farm the Terminids for fuel. And while there isn't much evidence for it, it's possible that the Illuminate have been farming them for much, much longer than humans. Given the fact the Illuminates are sufficiently more technologically advanced than Super Earth, it's safe to say they've been around for a much longer time. I haven't seen this theory anywhere, but what if the origins of the Terminids actually began much further back in time than humanity's first contact? What if the original Terminids were bugs that were genetically modified by the Illuminate millennia ago in order to fuel their space travel, and that the original groupings of Terminids Super Earth found were leftovers from the Illuminate's expansion throughout the galaxy? You'll notice on certain missions to Kepler Prime, the supposed home planet of the Terminids, that there are remnants of oil pumps there from the First Galactic War, which are obviously property of Super Earth. But if you go one step further, I wouldn't be surprised if the Terminids have a history of being exploited for fuel by every society that comes in contact with them. Honestly, I'm starting to feel bad for the bugs. Quick, before I start to feel too sorry for them, let's move down to level 3.